8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
With me. This show is all about your opinion and mine. It's not news as you know it, but discussion and debate on things that are, or should be, on your agenda. So with that in mind, here's what we'll be covering today on the afternoon agenda. How full is your medicine cupboard? Well, reviews found 1 in 10 drugs given out by GPs and pharmacists aren't needed, and ministers are calling for a crackdown on over-prescribing. I'll be discussing that with friend of the show, consultant cardiologist Dr. Asim Malhotra. We'll be getting the latest on a huge squabble over fishing rights between the UK and France. The French government says it has detained a British trawler and given a verbal warning to another boat fishing in the waters off its coast. The UK says the country's threats to block British boats from French ports break international law. And it's about to dominate the agenda of all traditional news outlets. So we need to talk about COP26. The climate conference kicks off this Sunday in Glasgow. So I'm asking, will COP26 achieve anything? That's the agenda for the next hour. What's on yours? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me @gbnews. But first, it's time for the news headlines.
Alex, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Polly Middlehurst with your GB News at 4 o'clock. The mother of 2 sisters who were killed by a teenager has vowed to stop him ever being released from prison. 19-year-old Daniel Hussein fatally stabbed Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman last year after making a pact with the devil. He's been sentenced to life with a minimum term to be served of 35 years. An independent report found the Met Police's response was below the standard it should have been when the girls were first reported missing. Met Police Commissioner Cressida Dick offered an apology to the family, which has been rejected. Mina Smallman paid tribute to her daughters after sentencing.
I think you've heard me say in the past there'll be no celebrations here, but justice has been done. But I think we do need to review that kind of separation. When is someone an adult? And I think it's very disrespectful to say that children can't tell the difference between good and evil.
The family of the footballer Emilio Sala have welcomed the conviction of the businessman who organised the flight that led to the player's death. But their solicitors say there are still many questions that need answers. 67-year-old David Henderson, seen here on the left, was found guilty at Cardiff Crown Court earlier on today. The single-engined plane carrying the 28-year-old Argentine footballer crashed into the English Channel in January 2019, killing the player and the plane's pilot, David Ibbotson. The UK government has threatened to retaliate if France imposes sanctions on British fishing vessels after a trawler was detained. The French authorities say 2 British ships were fined during checks off the coast of Le Havre yesterday. It's the latest escalation in the dispute between Britain and France over fishing rights. The Environment Secretary, George Eustace, says threats to block and tighten checks on British boats from French ports could be in breach of international law. He also confirmed that officials are investigating the circumstances surrounding the French action in the Channel.
What I've been able to establish so far is that in respect of that vessel,
They were on the list that was provided by the MMO initially to the European Union. The European Union therefore did grant a licence. We are seeing some reports that for some reason they were subsequently withdrawn from the list. It's unclear why that might have been at the moment.
Britain faces its highest tax burden since the 1950s. That's according to analysis of the Chancellor's autumn budget by think tank The Resolution Foundation. It found that households will pay £3,000 more tax as a result of measures introduced since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. However, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, says his ambition is to lower taxes. He announced an extra £150 billion for public services, extra cash for hospitals and a freeze on fuel duty. The Institute for Fiscal Studies Director Paul Johnson says despite the upbeat tone of the Chancellor, real pain will be felt by low and middle-income households.
On living standards, the Chancellor's presentation was upbeat. He claimed beforehand this was a budget to usher in a new age of optimism. But unfortunately for him and for us, the outlook for living standards doesn't match that upbeat tone. Over the next several years, a combination of tax increases and high inflation will mean very slow growth in living standards. A middle earner is likely to be worse off next year than this, as high rates of inflation and tax rises more than negate small average wage increases.
Now, the town of Cockermouth in Cumbria is experiencing high water levels and the Met Office is warning of potentially life-threatening flood levels. An amber weather warning has been issued so far as the area faced persistent and heavy rain. Up to 300 millimetres is expected to fall in parts of the region over the next few days, an area that typically sees an average of 160 millimetres each October. Sport for you, and US Open champion Emma Raducanu backed up her maiden WTA Tour win with a straight sets victory over Anna Bogdan to reach the quarterfinals at the Transylvania Open. The British #1, who battled past Polonia Hercog in 3 sets in her opening match, has now beaten Bogdan 6-3, 6-4. Raducanu is now set to face 19-year-old Ukrainian Marta Kostyuk in the final 8 of the tournament. That's all from me for now. Now back to Alex.
Hello, you're watching the Afternoon Agenda, and today we need to talk about COP26. Prepare to hear little other than climate change over the next few days as the world gears up for the UN Global Summit COP26 right here in the UK. There will be pointless ice sculptures ludicrously shipped in on emissions-vomiting freightliners to ironically demonstrate the pressing urgency of global warming. More dead-eyed activists than you could glue to the entire length of the M1. And the leaders of everywhere, from Trudeau's Principality of Woke to Nigeria's President Buhari, quite a feat considering half the population of the massive African nation believe him to be dead. All of them will be jostling for position to either opine about their nation's woes and virtue signal to the world, or get sharp-elbowed about clinging on to their coal-fired power stations. Everyone will analyse who's in the cool crowd. Expect Emmanuel Macron to cling to Joe Biden's coattails like his personal valet. And then who is, to coin an overused term of 2021, problematic, with the usual characters, from Prime Minister Modi of India to President Erdogan of Turkey, to all be put in the naughty corner by the world's media, who will simultaneously hold up the scowling little teenager from Sweden like the modern-day Magi. But it's the no-shows at the conference in Glasgow that speak the loudest. Because as we will all be mithered and nagged to turn vegetarian, tear out our gas boilers, buy penny farthings and sterilise our children, our vainglorious stoical efforts to rival the ascetic lifestyle of a Tibetan monk will be painfully eclipsed by the construction of another megafactory in Xingtai. But if we are in a climate emergency, and, dear viewer, the UK is the only big economy to put stringent net zero targets into legislation, then we're all about to be sucked into one of the most radical shake-ups in human existence. While Putin still wargames over gas supplies to Germany, China feigns faux eco-interest while planning global manufacturing domination, And the wind doesn't blow, meaning your house will cost 10 quid a second to heat this winter. It's hard to adapt and change our own lifestyle habits when the threat feels remote and existential. And the apocalyptic scenes of collapsing ice caps, raging infernos and biblical floods are set to strike once you've shuffled off your mortal coil. But adapt we must. Yet who should be shouldering the greatest burden? There is the geopolitical game of chess to be played with oil-rich Emiratis, Muscovite malevolence and Chinese communist power play, but also a seemingly insurmountable mountain to climb at home if we are to make up for decades of lost time tinkering around the edges with turbines while allowing 6 major nuclear power plant projects to collapse, leaving us woefully out of step while proclaiming to lead the world with our eco-credentials. So what does the future have in store? And will it all be worth it? Or will all the talk of emissions simply be a load of hot air? The day of reckoning awaits. Today, we really need to talk about COP26. My first guest this afternoon is the head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Christopher Snowdon. Christopher, do you think that COP26 is going to be value for money for this country?
It's going to be very expensive for this country and for any country that tries to achieve net zero. And that's going to be the great difficulty in getting any kind of meaningful resolution out of this. There's a prisoner's dilemma here, really, which is that with the exception of a few technologies which are cheaper, at least in the medium term, if not in the short term, net zero is an incredibly expensive job. And in fact, it's a technologically impossible job as we speak. Some countries have natural resources which help them a little bit. We've got a lot of coast. We put up wind turbines. Iceland's got a lot of hydroelectric power and so on, but a lot of countries haven't. And of course, a lot of countries don't have the kind of wealth that allows them to justify putting greater costs onto their citizens. Most of the world is developing. It doesn't have to just develop with coal, but a lot of the time that's the cheapest option. So there is a sort of a free rider problem, a collective action problem, and a prisoner's dilemma that means that anybody who goes along with the Boris Johnson view of this and thinks that we need to get cracking straight away no matter what the cost, they're going to ultimately suffer, and everybody else is going to leave Glasgow kind of giggling up their sleeve that they got one over on their international rivals.
It's interesting because, in the West, climate change seems to be a newfangled religion under which we're all expected to self-flagellate. But frankly, what is the point in worrying about, whether you should have a plant-based diet or how many times you put a load of washing in your machine or whether you should leave the television on standby when China's, massively polluting the world still and isn't even going to bother turning up?
Yeah, well, that's the kind of game theory aspect of this, isn't it? It's we in Britain produce about 1% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, and so people are naturally going to feel that they shouldn't have to make great sacrifices when China's still building coal power plants, and the rest of the world is producing 99% of the problem. But of course, if everybody felt like that, nothing would ever change. So the question is, how do you get all the countries in the world to change at the same time? I personally don't see how it's really possible. How can you have genuinely binding, legally enforceable targets that you expect everyone around the world, whether it's Venezuela or North Korea or China or India or Brazil, to go along with? I just think that it's not going to happen in practice. You only have to look, even in this country yesterday, the Chancellor froze fuel duty yet again and cut air passenger duty. Are they the policies of a government that's serious about net zero? I would say probably not, but they are the practical policies that you're going to see in a democracy, because any government that takes this really seriously and makes a full drive over the course of the next 29 years to get to net zero will probably, if not almost certainly, get kicked out of office by an electorate that is only really concerned about climate change very often in the abstract, but is very concerned in the here and now about their living standards.
I mean, that's the interesting thing, because some of the targets this government have put in place, to me, I can't see them happening. You know, trying to get rid of petrol and diesel-powered cars by 2030, that's about 8 years away. How on earth are we supposed to change the entire fleet of British roads in that period of time? Equally, with things like gas boilers, that is a mammoth undertaking, and we're not even seeing the sketch of a plan yet for how that's going to be achieved.
Yeah, with transport and domestic heating, you're looking at two areas where, in principle at least, you could get to zero carbon. That's in contrast to quite large parts of the economy where it's only possible, hypothetically, if we come up with some miraculous technology. So we're not, for example, going to have solar-powered aeroplanes or solar-powered lorries or steel plants. So a lot of this actually depends on us inventing things that don't currently exist. In the case of transport and heating, you can do it. The heat pumps do exist. Electric cars do exist. But they require an enormous amount of spending on infrastructure. You're going to need to have power plants power plugs for electric cars outside tens of millions of homes, and they're going to have to be outside everyone's home, regardless of whether they have an electric car or not, because people don't always park at the same place on the street. And when it comes to domestic heating, yeah, heat pumps exist. They're not that great. They're not that efficient. They're rather big and bulky. People aren't going to like it when a man from the government comes around and tells them that they have to have their existing efficient and effective gas boiler ripped out and going to have to pay 10, 15, 20,000 pounds for a new one. These are the kind of massive problems that the government is going to be imposing on people, and I think the public will quite understandably kick back. And this is regardless of any issue around the science of this. I'm not saying that we shouldn't attend this. I'm not a climate activist or a climate denier. I'm just saying that as a matter of public policy, it's really difficult for us to see how even the stuff that is in principle possible is going to be achieved in a democracy, let alone how we're going to achieve the things that are currently technologically impossible.
Couldn't agree more. Christopher, lovely having you on as always. Christopher Snowdon there, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the IEA. For real change and improvement, it does, of course, mean changing our lives, our everyday habits, simple things like driving our cars. But how likely are we to do that? Dr. Judith Anderson is the chair of the Climate Change Alliance and has been looking into the individual changes we'd have to make to reach net zero. Wonderful to have you on, Judith. I mean, Christopher Snowdon before me has, pointed out something which is very true, which is if we're going to meet all these targets within the timeframes that we hope to, it's going to take a huge amount of effort, not just by governments, but by individuals to adapt to completely new lifestyle choices.
Yes, you're absolutely right. My main interest actually is the emotions that happen when we think about climate change and how that gets translated into behaviours. And I think we have to look at those first. We have to look at the fact that the majority of people are actually very concerned about climate change, particularly young people. And what we're finding is that if people gather in community, if people get together in community and understand this, they are much more likely to make those practical changes. You're much more likely to have situations where people are prepared to car share if they're sharing their concerns about climate change and having those heard.
But how does that expand when with something like COP26, we're talking about the global community, aren't we? And when we live in such an interconnected world and the media constantly reports on what China's up to or what Russia's up to or what's going on in Saudi Arabia, if people are feeling they're making their small sacrifices, which actually are probably quite big to them personally, on an individual basis back at home, but then find that countries like China aren't even bothering to turn up to the conference, how does that psychologically affect this community effort that we must put in order to meet net zero?
Well, I think, Alex, that a lot of people really understand that historically our emissions per capita are 19 times that of China, and that also we've exported our emissions to China because we want cheap goods. And I think a great many people, including the young people who are very concerned about climate change and feel let down by governments, really understand that. And I do understand that approach of calling out China, but at least they do have a plan which they may well be able to bring to fruition of, they know they're going to increase their emissions for the next few years, but they have actually got a plan to get to net zero. And a lot of other countries are talking about net zero, but actually don't have a coherent plan. Indeed, the government in this country isn't following the plan that the climate advisory group are suggesting.
And so do you think that COP26... Yes, Mr. Do you think COP26 is going to get the job done? I mean, this is the moment, isn't it? That every time we have these big environmental summits, everyone says it is the moment. We have to put these things into motion now. It's the critical point in humanity's history to make the change we need to see to save the planet. We hear that every time. A lot of positive words are spoken. The photo shoots happen. People go back to their own countries. But then in a globalised society, it seems that, you know, the consumerist mentality wins out and geopolitics starts raising its ugly head, and it's very hard to stick to these pledges.
Alex, I'm absolutely in agreement with you about the consumerist mentality in relation to this. I remember some words that Bill McGibbon used after Paris, which always strike me, was that it was a miracle that the Paris Agreement got made, but it was a disaster that that was all that got made. And I'm worried that the same thing will happen with COP, that there'll be significant movements, but they won't be enough. Because let's remember that the IPCC predictions are actually, they actually assume three things that don't exist yet. One of those is that we will have already started to reduce our carbon emissions globally, which we haven't. It also assumes that there'll be carbon capture to scale, which isn't there yet. And it also assumes that that agriculture will be a sink for carbon rather than a source. So you'll hear people challenging the IPCC science, even though it's part of it's governmentally agreed, and yet actually the IPCC is quite conservative, really, and the urgency is there, and we really do need to do what it takes. I'm hopeful, but I'm also concerned that COP will not achieve what it needs to achieve. Partly because people haven't paid attention to the detail, even though the experts who understand this stuff and have really worked on the detail, their work has not yet been adopted by governments.
Judith, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. That's Dr. Judith Anderson, who's the chair of Climate Change Alliance. Well, I'm also joined now by Conservative peer and member of the Environment and Climate Change Committee, Lord Peter Lilly. Peter, fantastic to have you joining us today. First of all, what was your reaction to those 2 points in the budget, stripping back air passenger duty on domestic flights and not putting up fuel duty? That doesn't seem very much in line with the government's net zero targets.
Well, the Chancellor would say he's put up the passenger duty for the rest of the world for long flights and merely restored the situation that there isn't double taxation in the UK. But trivial. The idea that the rest of the world is going to decide whether or not to decarbonise on the basis of minor aspects of one budget in Britain, which is the country which has made the strongest legal commitment to decarbonising, I just think shows that a lot of people in this country, in the climate activist world, are more interested in self-flagellation than they are in rational policy.
In terms of rational policy, do you think we're going to get any coming out of COP26? Do you think that the world leaders are ready to sit down, ready to make a deal and ready to commit to a deal?
It seems unlikely. This is COP26. What does that mean? There have been 25 previous conferences of the parties. And if you look at the chart of CO2 emissions, or concentrations in the atmosphere, they have risen steadily. And at no point has any COP produced any change in the gradient of the graph, let alone a downturn. So it's very unlikely that this will either. If it does, fair enough, then we should do our part. If it doesn't, and the rest of the world is going to continue to emit carbon, the 99% that we don't commit, then we have to think carefully, is it sensible for us to stand up trying to dam a whole river with our own little finger? Or would it be better to devote our effort and our expenditure more to adapting to what the rest of the world will be producing, rather than imagining that we single-handedly can stop it?
Thank you, Lord Lee. That was a really interesting juxtaposition there. Delightful to have you on. That was Lord Lee, the Conservative peer and member of the Environment and Climate Change Committee in Parliament. Now, after the break, we'll be crossing to the Old Bailey, where a man who murdered two sisters in a London park has been jailed for life. We'll be back in a moment.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Welcome back. A man who murdered two sisters in a random attack has been jailed for life. Daniel Hussein will serve a minimum of 35 years. The 19-year-old murdered sisters Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman after making a satanic blood pact. We can go live now to our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White, who is live at the Old Bailey. Mark, what's the latest?
Well, he is now beginning that life sentence, 35 years at least, before he's even considered for parole. He was not given a whole life term because he was under 21 at the time of the murder, just over his 18th birthday, in fact. As he was sentenced today, though, he continued the arrogant behaviour that he'd showed throughout the trial. He sat in a seat at Belmarsh Prison via a video link, refusing to look at the camera, perched up on that seat, sideways, looking out of the window throughout all of this procedure. Yet more insult after injury for the family of these two sisters. I've been looking back at this very disturbing case.
Armed with taser stun guns, the moment police move in to arrest killer Daniel Hussein.
Mate, you're under arrest. Come out of your dress. Keep walking towards me. Keep walking towards me. Stay where you are, stay where you are, stay where you are. Hands on your head, stay where you are. Face me. Hands on your head, stay where you are. You're under arrest, all right?
He is, it's clear, completely unfazed. A cold, callous young man who just weeks earlier murdered two sisters in a frenzied knife attack. Part, we're told, of a bizarre pact with the devil. This is one of the last images of Hussein's victims, Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman, a selfie taken by them minutes before they were murdered. The sisters had been with a group of friends on the 5th of June last year, celebrating Biba's birthday. As the friends drifted off home, Biba and Nicole stayed on in the Friant Country Park, dancing late into the night, until coming face to face with their killer, who stabbed them dozens of times. Their bodies were discovered almost 2 days later by Nicole's boyfriend, as family and friends launched their own search for the missing sisters, frustrated by the slow police response. After the police watchdog this week criticised that initial response as below standard, Scotland Yard Commissioner Cressida Dick offered an apology to the family. The victim's mother said the time for apologies had long gone. It is yet another deeply uncomfortable moment for the Met boss.
This brings more pressure on the Met and on the Commissioner's position. The way they dealt with the missing person report and how they investigated it was insufficient. They've apologised for that. But week after week, we're seeing more pressure brought on the Met. Different apologies coming out. The Commissioner's position under threat all the time. They've got an awful lot of work to do to rebuild trust and confidence in police in London.
Can she survive?
I think she'll survive for 2 more years. I think she's determined to see this job through.
Do you have any injuries? Yeah. The wrists from the cuffs? No. Oh.
In police custody, Hussein still had injuries to his right hand, deep cuts he sustained while stabbing Biba and Nicole.
Oh, is this the interview? No, that's a question. The injuries on your fingers. What happened there?
Detectives pieced together his movements on the night of the murders. This is him arriving back at his father's house near the park. His blood-stained trousers removed, the injured hand tucked into the jacket tied around his waist. The blood from that injured hand was found all over the crime scene. This is Daniel Hussein in an Asda supermarket in the days before the murders, buying the block of knives he'd go on to use in the attack. And in a search of his mother's home, police uncovered a far more sinister aspect to this crime: satanic symbols in his bedroom. And nearby, a handwritten letter. It was a deal with the devil, a promise to kill 6 women every 6 months. It was signed in his own blood. In return, he believed he'd win the lottery and have better luck with women. Search teams even found receipts for lottery tickets purchased in the days after the murders. It's not known why the sisters were targeted. This is Biba and Nicole in a local co-op buying food and drink shortly before heading to Friant Park. Tragically, they may simply have been in the wrong place at the wrong time when Hussein discovered them.
As horrific as these murders undoubtedly were, for the sisters' family and friends, there is the added trauma, not just of the initial lacklustre police response, but in learning that 2 officers who should have been guarding the scene were arrested and then later charged with taking selfies next to the bodies.
Those 2 officers are due to appear at the Old Bailey next week. Their lawyers have indicated they intend to plead guilty. But for now, Daniel Hussein is beginning life behind bars for the murder of Biba and Nicole, 2 sisters who'd simply been relishing life and celebrating their freedom from lockdown. Mark White, GB News at the Old Bailey.
Well, the mother of the 2 murdered sisters, Mina Smallman, appeared on the steps of the Old Bailey a little earlier to thank actually the Metropolitan Police, not the service as a whole, because she has some really fundamental issues with what she says is a deep-rooted problem within the Metropolitan Police, but to thank those specific officers on the murder investigation team who she said had gone above and beyond, who had really been devoted to trying to solve this case and bring this young man to justice. So she thanked them for that, but she will be back in court on Tuesday of next week when 2 police officers who should have been guarding the crime scene were instead allegedly taking selfies next to the bodies of these 2 sisters. They, it has been indicated, will plead guilty when they appear in court. It will be yet more pressure on the Metropolitan Commissioner, who thus far has refused calls for her to resign.
Mark, thank you very much. Well, after the break, we'll be getting the latest on a huge row over fishing rights between the UK and France. The French government says it's detained a British trawler and given a verbal warning to another boat fishing in waters off its coast. The UK says the country's threats to block British boats from French ports break international law. First, let's get a roundup of the news headlines.
Your latest headlines on GB News at 4:30. The mother of two sisters who were murdered by a teenager has vowed to stop him ever being released from prison. As you've been hearing, 19-year-old Daniel Hussein fatally stabbed Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman last June after he made a pact with the devil. He's been sentenced to life and will serve a minimum term of 35 years. Commissioner Cressida Dick has offered an apology to the family after an independent report found failings in the Met Police's initial response. The UK government has threatened to retaliate should France impose sanctions on British fishing vessels after a trawler was detained. French authorities said that 2 British ships were fined during checks off the coast of Le Havre on Wednesday. It's the latest escalation in the dispute between Britain and France over fishing rights. And the businessman who organised the flight that crashed and killed the footballer Emiliano Sala has been found guilty of endangering the safety of an aircraft. David Henderson, seen here on the left, was convicted by a jury at Cardiff Crown Court earlier on today. The small plane carrying 28-year-old Sala crashed into the English Channel, killing the player and the plane's pilot David Ibbotson in January 2019. Britain faces its highest tax burden since the 1950s. That's the Resolution Foundation's analysis of the Chancellor's autumn budget. It found that households will pay £3,000 more tax as a result of measures introduced since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. But the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, says his ambition is to eventually lower taxes. He's announced an extra £150 billion for public services, extra cash for hospitals and a freeze on fuel duty. That's it from me. I'm back with a full news update at 5.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Welcome back. Now, this show is nothing without you and your thoughts. And today, we need to talk about COP26. The conference in Glasgow starts on Sunday, so I'm asking you, will the climate conference achieve anything? Elias says, I don't think it will. It's like going to the park and having your lunch. You just take your rubbish home with you to recycle, while others would just fly tip their stuff in the river. Stephen says, it's a waste of time and money, much like climate change as a whole. Rick says, a big carbon footprint and plenty of waste. So less than nothing, really. Vince says, complete waste of time. Graham says, what it will achieve is a good few world leaders and their hangers-on will put on a few pounds and get drunk at UK taxpayers' expense. Ricky says no, because climate change is a load of rubbish. Floods, rain, excessive heat has been happening for years, since I was a kid, and I'm nearly 50. Paula says no country will get to net zero, but the more they can do, the better. I like ending on a positive one. Now, tensions between Britain and France have intensified after French authorities have detained a British trawler off its coast. France has also, once again, threatened to impose sanctions against the UK over fishing rights. The so-called Cod War started after post-Brexit Britain restricted access to British waters for EU fishermen. Just this week, France has threatened to impose harsh customs controls on British imports, a ban on British vessels from some French ports, and even cutting off electricity to the Channel Islands unless Britain allows French boats back in. The UK says that breaks international law. We are now joined by Dr. Alan Mendoza, the co-founder and executive director at the Henry Jackson Society, a transatlantic foreign policy and national security think tank. Lovely to have you back on, Alan. How do you interpret those tensions between the UK and France? Is it just the French sounding off? Do you think they are actually going to do anything?
Well, it's a really good question. I mean, we've already seen them do something in the sense that they have started seizing, or for want of a better word, fining British ships. So I think there is certainly an intention on the part of the French to cause some trouble here. How far it goes is another matter. I think a lot of this depends on how this issue gets resolved between the two countries, and also whether any other European countries are willing to talk to France and say, look, come on, just, if you want to have a dispute with Britain, do it legally, do it through arbitration, but don't start taking extra legal measures or unlawful measures in order to enforce something. Because guess what? We're trying to renegotiate a Brexit deal right now.
Yeah, it seems to me the EU have rather washed their hands of the French woes at the moment, and France, therefore, is acting rather unilaterally. But, I mean, should we just say, well, go on then, have some boats in our waters again, despite the fact we're supposed to be taking back control, to assuage the French? Or is it right that we dig our heels in and say, the law's the law, these are our waters, this is the new world that we now live in, suck it up?
Well, of course it's right to enforce a deal that was agreed, basically. That's the whole point of it. Fishing, we know, is a very emotive issue. It's an issue that really matters to certain communities in the UK. And they were promised that they would be getting their waters back, basically. And there was a whole programme in place for how that would happen, with differing shares occurring over the course of the next 5 years until 2026. And the French know full well that the numbers of licensings they'll be getting will be reducing over that time. So for us to change our position on this would be wrong, firstly. It would be very disappointing to those communities who trusted in the deal, and it would send entirely the wrong message to France, which might wish to push even further claims as a result of it. So we're going to have to stand firm on this, Alex.
What do we do if the French kick up a fuss and they do things like cut off power supply to Jersey, or decide to blockade imports from the continent coming into the UK in time for Christmas? I mean, how do we retaliate to that?
Well, let's start by saying that if they do that, they would be sending a very powerful message to any country that has a deal with France, any ally or any country that regards itself as an ally of France, that France just simply cannot be trusted. Now, I'm not sure that the French would like to be in that position where essentially their word would no longer be trusted internationally. So I would hope we'd never get into that situation in the first place. However, were it to come, we would have to think long and hard about, possible retaliatory methods that go the other way, of course. Now, what we don't want, of course, is to create some kind of, if you like, transport war between the two countries. But there are, numerous areas where we might be able to sort of make life a bit more difficult for the French, should it be required. But let's just stress again, we hope it's not required. We hope the French will see sense, and that if they have a gripe with what's going on in fishing, they take it to arbitration, they take it to a legal conclusion, and don't take illegal action.
What do you think that the end point is going to be in this argument? Do you think we will be able to rub along nicely with the French again, or do you think that, you know, Macron is just far too stubborn, and that, you know, the French are about to get wrapped up in their own presidential elections in spring next year, and so there's a lot of playing politics going on at the same time? Do you think we are going to finish this row before Christmas, or do you think there's going to be some, you know, pretty tough relationships ahead?
Well, I think you're right to highlight the fact there's a French presidential election coming around the corner. You know, Mr. Macron is fully aware that he's not the most popular man in France, or woman in France, for that matter, in any way, shape or form. And as a result, he needs something, particularly to try and outflank candidates to his right, who've been gaining in the polls in recent months. So for him, it's quite a useful row to keep on being able to stir. Even if he doesn't intend to do anything about it, what it shows is that he is protecting French interests. He is a man who could be trusted to lead France for a second term. And I suspect that because that election is likely to rumble on in uncertainty next year, we will see more of this cropping up after Christmas too.
Alan, thank you so much. Always great having you on the show, giving your sanguine thoughts. Well, what we're going to do now is cross straight over to America and the White House, where President Joe Biden is giving a press conference.
It will not add to the deficit at all. It will actually reduce the deficit, according to the economist. I want to thank my colleagues in the Congress for their leadership. We spent hours and hours and hours over months and months working on this. No one got everything they wanted, including me. But that's what compromise is. That's consensus. And that's what I ran on. I've long said compromise and consensus are the only way to get big things done in a democracy, important things done for the country. I know it's hard. I know how deeply people feel about the things that they fight for. But this framework includes historic investments in our nation and in our people. Any single element of this framework would fundamentally be viewed as a fundamental change in America. Taken together, they're truly consequential. I'll have more to say after I return from the critical meetings in Europe this week. But for now, let me lay out a few points. First, we face, and I apologize for saying this again, we face an inflection point as a nation. For most of the 20th century, we led the world by a significant margin because we invested in our people, not only in our roads and our highways and our bridges, but in our people and our families. We didn't just build an interstate highway system, we built a highway to the sky. We invested to win the space race, and we won. We're also among the first to provide access to free education for all Americans, beginning back in the late 1800s. That decision alone to invest in our children and their families was a major part of why we were able to lead the world for much of the 20th century. But somewhere along the way, we stopped investing in ourselves, investing in our people. America is still the largest economy in the world. We still have the most productive workers and the most innovative minds in the world. But we've risked losing our edge as a nation. Our infrastructure used to be rated the best in the world. Today, according to the World Economic Forum, we rank 13th in the world. We used to lead the world in educational achievement. Now the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development ranks America 35th out of the 37 major countries when it comes to investing in early childhood education and care. We know how our children start impacts significantly on how they'll finish. We can't be competitive in the 21st century global economy if we continue this slide. That's why I've said all along, we need to build America from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down, with the trickle-down economics that's always failed us. I can't think of a single time when the middle class has done well that the wealthy haven't done very well. I think of many times, including now, when the wealthy, the super wealthy, do very well, and the middle class don't do well. That's why I propose the investments Congress is now considering in two critical pieces of legislation. Positions I ran on as president, positions I announced when I laid out in a joint session of Congress what my economic agenda was. These are not about left versus right, or moderate versus progressive, or anything else that pits Americans against one another. This is about competitiveness versus complacency, competitiveness versus complacency. It's about expanding opportunity, not opportunity denied. It's about leading the world or letting the world pass us by. Today, with my Democratic colleagues, we have a framework for my Build Back Better initiative. And here's how it will fundamentally change the lives of millions of people for the better. Millions of you are in the so-called sandwich generation, who feel financially squeezed by raising a child and caring for an aging parent. About 820,000 seniors in America, people with disabilities, have applied for Medicaid, and they're on a waiting list right now to get home care. They need some help. They don't have to be kicked out of their home, but they need a little help getting around, having their meals made occasionally for them. They don't want to put them in nursing homes, not because of the cost, but because it's a matter of dignity. They want to stay in their homes. But it's hard. You're just looking for an answer. Your parents can keep living independently with dignity. For millions of families in America, this issue is the most important issue they're facing. It's personal. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to expand services for seniors so families can get help from well-trained, well-paid professionals. Help them take care of their parents at home. Cook meals for them. Get their groceries for them. Help them get around. Help them live in their own home with the dignity they deserve to be afforded. Quite frankly, what we found is that this is more popular or as popular as anything else we're proposing, because the American people understand the need. It's a matter of dignity and pride. 30 years ago, we ranked number 7 among the advanced economies in the world, the share of women working. You know where we are today? We ranked 23rd. 23rd. 7 to 23. Once again, our competitors are investing. We're standing still. Today, there are nearly 2 million women in America not working today simply because they can't afford childcare. Typical family spends about $11,000 a year on childcare. Some states, it's $14,500 a year per child. We're going to make sure nearly all families earning less than $300,000 a year will pay no more than 7% of their income for childcare. And for a family making $100,000 a year, that will save them more than $5,000 in childcare. This is a fundamental game changer for families and for our economy, as more parents, especially women, can get back to work and work in the workforce. I'm looking at a lot of significant press people in front of me. A lot of them are working mothers. They know what it costs. I remember when I got to the Senate, I lost my wife and daughter in an accident, my 2 boys. I started commuting 250 miles a day because I had my mom and my dad and my brother and my sister help me take care of my kids because I couldn't afford childcare, and I was getting a serious salary, $42,000 a year. We've also extended the historic middle-class tax, that's what I call it, middle-class tax cut for parents. That is the expanded child tax credit we passed through the American Rescue Plan. What that means is, for folks at home, they're getting $300 a month for every child under the age of 6, $250 for every child under the age of 18. We're extending that. The money is already a life changer for so many working families. This will help cut child poverty in half this year, according to experts. That's not all it does. It changes the whole dynamic for working parents. In the past, if you paid taxes and had a good income, you could deduct under the tax code $2,000 per child from the taxes you owed. But how many families do you know, a cashier, waiters, healthcare workers, who never got the benefit of the full tax credit because they didn't have that much to deduct, and it wasn't refundable? So it either came off your tax bill or you didn't get full credit. Why should if somebody making $500,000 a year, or $150,000 or $200,000 a year, get to write it off their taxes? And the people who need the help even more, they don't have that much tax to pay. They don't get the benefit, and they have the same cost of raising their children. 80% of those left out were working parents who just didn't make enough money. That's why in the American Rescue Plan, we didn't just expand the amount of the middle class tax cut. We also made it refundable. This framework will make it permanently refundable, making sure that the families who need it get a full credit for it, in addition to those who are already getting full credit. They're going to make sure that every 3- and 4-year-old child in America go to high-quality preschool. That's part of the legislation I just brought up to the Congress. Studies show that when we put 3 and 4 years old in school, not daycare, school, we increase by up to 47% the chance that that child, no matter what their background, will be able to earn a college degree. As my wife Jill is in the back here, always says, any country that out-educates us is going to outcompete us. We can finally take us from 12 years to 14 years of universal education in America. We also make investments in higher education by increasing Pell Grants to help students from lower-income families attend community colleges and 4-year schools. And we invest in historically black universities, colleges and universities, HBCUs, minority-serving institutions, and tribal colleges. Make sure every young student has a shot at a good-paying job of the future. This framework extends tax credits to lower premiums for folks who are in the Affordable Care Act for another 3 years. For 4 million folks in the 12 states that haven't expanded Medicaid, all the rest have, this framework will enable you to get affordable coverage. And Medicare will now cover the cost of hearing aids and hearing checkups. This framework also makes the most significant investment to deal with the climate crisis ever happened, beyond any other advanced nation in the world. Over 1 billion metric tons of emission reductions, at least 10 times bigger on climate than any bill that has ever passed before, and enough to position us for a 50 to 52% emission reductions by the year 2030. And we'll do it in ways that grow the domestic industries, create good-paying union jobs, address long-standing environmental injustices as well. Tax credit to help people do things like weatherize their homes so they use less energy, install solar panels and develop clean energy products. Help business.
Well, that was President Joe Biden, Sleepy Joe, as they say, and you can kind of see why, can't you? Setting out his vision for domestic spending in the US. Well, we'll bring you more on that as we have it in our news bulletins. Ministers have ordered a crackdown on over-prescribing of medicines after a review found that 1 in 10 drugs given out by GPs and pharmacists are pointless and potentially harmful. Family doctors will be told to boost the use of social prescribing, such as gardening, walking or volunteering. Well, joining me now in the studio is friend of the show and consultant cardiologist Dr. Aseem Malhotra. Aseem, I know that this is something you have spoken about extensively, the fact that we are massively over-medicated in the West, when actually there are plenty of things we can do to boost our health without depending on drugs.
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. I think let's not underestimate this problem. I mean, the over-medicated population in this country and even globally is a major public health crisis. So talking about this government report, they said 1 in 10 medications potentially harmful or over-prescribed. The same report also suggested about 1 in 5 hospital admissions in the over 65s is because of side effects of drugs. But if you look at it in a global perspective, quite reliable estimates suggest that the 3rd most common cause of death now after heart disease and cancer is side effects of medications that your doctor prescribes for you. So we've got to understand, first of all, how have we got to this point, and then what are we going to do about it? So we need to move a bit more upstream. So this government report was kind of suggesting this is the responsibility of doctors, and of course we all have a role, but ultimately the reason we're in the situation that we're in is because the information that doctors are using to make clinical decisions when it comes to prescribing is being biased and corrupted by commercial influence. So, you know, I talk about the fact that we've got an epidemic of misinformed doctors and misinformed and unwittingly harm patients. And the main reasons for that is because of biased funding of research, biased funding and reporting in medical journals, biased reporting in the media, and commercial conflicts of interest. So actually, it's the drug industry that designed these trials. Now, one very interesting analysis from somebody in Stanford, in fact, I would describe him as like the Stephen Hawking-like figure of medicine, Professor John Ioannidis in Stanford University, Professor of Medicine and Statistics. And his own analysis a few years ago suggested only 7% of all medical published research is either high quality or relevant to patients. I mean, that's quite an extraordinary figure. So, he's also written suggesting that most published research findings are false. So if you accept and understand that to start with, you can explain what's going on downstream, and that's causing huge harm to public health and to patients. So we need to take a step back. The government, unfortunately, didn't highlight the biggest culprits behind this problem. The elephant in the room is the pharmaceutical industry who, because they are there just as profit-making businesses, unfortunately, I would argue that their business model is essentially fraud.
What would you say are the main culprits here then? Because there are, without doubt, medicines that people really rely upon and need and are correctly prescribed. What sort of medications are the ones that you think in not all patients, but some patients, are being given unnecessarily?
Well, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, Alex. You're right. I think what's happened is we produce drugs that are beneficial to a minority of people to a certain extent. And the drug industry, then, what they do over time is they try and expand the use of their drugs to many more people, and that's when the excess comes in. If I was to give you a very basic example, to try and help people understand how this works. If you look at insulin, okay, insulin is used for type 1 diabetics predominantly, and it is life-saving for people with type 1 diabetes who cannot produce their own insulin to deal with high glucose because the pancreas stops working properly. Now, it's life-saving for them. Without insulin, they would die. If you gave the same dose of insulin to somebody who was not diabetic, it would kill them. So it's about the right treatment for the right patient at the right time. But also, when you talk about other drugs, Alex, so the big killers in the Western world, cardiovascular disease, cancer, etc. But if you look at the risk factors behind heart disease, you look at type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, very high cholesterol levels, most of the people taking most of those drugs are not going to get any benefit in either preventing...
That's statins, things like
statins, for example, yes, are not going to get any benefit in preventing a heart attack, stroke or death. And the other issue here that needs to be highlighted is there isn't true informed consent going on. So say you came to me and you said, listen, doc, I've got a family history of heart disease, for example. Should I take a statin? My cholesterol's okay, but I've heard it might be life-saving for me. I would say, Alex, listen, you haven't had a heart attack. You're probably low risk. In fact, I'll calculate that you're low risk. The chances of a statin benefiting you are probably 1 in 100 in preventing a heart attack or stroke over 5 years and will not prolong your life. Now, you may take those stats and say, oh, that doesn't sound very effective. Okay, I don't think I'm going to take a statin. That conversation doesn't go on. I mean, one of the reasons why we haven't combated this problem as well, with the understanding that most research findings are also not very reliable, is most doctors are unaware of this problem, Alex. Don't presume what I'm telling you every doctor knows about. Most doctors who are listening to this will not even know about this problem. So there needs to be greater awareness. And then when the information through the research is disseminated down to the clinicians, to healthcare professionals, they need to understand it in a way that they can then translate that information to patients. And again, that doesn't happen. So really, I mean, I wrote an article in The Guardian about this a few years ago, and they titled it "Finance Trumps Healthcare at Every Level." And the situation is so bad, that I have called, and I've been supported by other doctors, for a Chilcot-style inquiry into overprescription of drugs and into trying to sort out and protect the public from the excesses and manipulations of the drug industry.
It's fascinating stuff. We could talk about it all afternoon, I'm sure, but we've got news headlines and things to also go to. It seemed lovely having you back in again. I'm sure we'll be speaking to you again next week. Well, you're watching the Afternoon Agenda. Still lots to come. Don't go anywhere. Hello and welcome. If you've just joined the Afternoon Agenda on GB News, I'm Alex Phillips, and this show is all about what I think, what you think, and what my guests think. So it's not news as you know it, but discussion and debate on things that are or should be on your agenda. Still to come this afternoon. The Duchess of Cornwall delivered a deeply impassioned speech on violence against women last night. Highlighting the brutal deaths of Sarah Everard and Sabina Nessa, Camilla said a culture of silence and feelings of shame led many women to conceal their abuse. We'll find out how important this is for people trying to raise awareness and tackle the issue of violence against women. And it's about to explode onto the news agendas of traditional news outlets everywhere. But we need to talk about COP26. The climate conference kicks off in Glasgow this Sunday. But I'm asking, will COP26 achieve anything? That's the agenda for the next hour. What's on yours? Email me, gbnews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me @gbnews. But first, it's the news headlines.
I'm Polly Middlehurst, and this is your news at just after 5 o'clock. The mother of two sisters who were killed by a teenager has vowed to stop him ever being released from prison. 19-year-old Daniel Hussein fatally stabbed Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman last June after he said making a pact with the devil. He's been sentenced to life with a minimum term of 35 years. An independent report found the Met Police's response had been below the standard it should have been when the girls were first reported missing. Met Police Commissioner Cressida Dick offered an apology to the family, which has been rejected. Mina Smallman paid tribute to her daughters after sentencing.
I think you've heard me say in the past there'll be no celebrations here, but justice has been done. But I think we do need to review that kind of separation. When is someone an adult? And I think it's very disrespectful to say that children can't tell the difference between good and evil.
And the family of footballer Emiliano Sala have welcomed the conviction of the businessman who organised the flight that led to the player's death. But their solicitors say there are still questions that need answers. 67-year-old David Henderson, seen here on the left, was found guilty at Cardiff Crown Court earlier on today. The single-engined plane carrying the 28-year-old Argentine footballer crashed into the English Channel in January 2019, killing the player and the plane's pilot, David Ibbotson. Now, the UK government has threatened to retaliate if France imposes sanctions on British fishing vessels after a trawler was detained. The French authorities say the two British ships were fined during checks off the coast of Le Havre yesterday. It's the latest escalation in the dispute between Britain and France over fishing rights. The Environment Secretary, George Eustace, says threats to block and tighten checks on British boats from French ports could be in breach of international law. He also confirmed that officials are investigating the circumstances surrounding the French action in the Channel.
I've been able to establish so far is that in respect of that vessel, they were on the list that was provided by the MMO initially to the European Union. The European Union therefore did grant a licence. We are seeing some reports that for some reason they were subsequently withdrawn from the list. It's unclear why that might have been at the moment.
George Eustace. Well, Britain faces its highest tax burden since the 1950s. That's according to analysis of the Chancellor's autumn budget by the think tank The Resolution Foundation. It found that households will be paying £3,000 more as a result of measures introduced since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. However, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, says his ambition is to lower taxes. He's announced an extra £150 billion for public services, extra cash for hospitals and a freeze for fuel duty. The Institute for Fiscal Studies Director Paul Johnson says despite the upbeat tone of the Chancellor, real pain will be felt by low and middle income households.
On living standards, the Chancellor's presentation was upbeat. He claimed beforehand this was a budget to usher in a new age of optimism. But unfortunately for him and for us, the outlook for living standards doesn't match that upbeat tone. Over the next several years, a combination of tax increases and high inflation will mean very slow growth in living standards. A middle earner is likely to be worse off next year than this, as high rates of inflation and tax rises more than negate small average wage increases.
A man, a 36-year-old man who sent malicious emails to the Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner, has been spared jail. Benjamin Iliffe was arrested on Wednesday after sending the email from his personal account on the 16th of October. Iliffe, who appeared by video link from Thorpewood Police Station, was sentenced to 15 weeks in prison, suspended for 18 months. He was also handed a 2-year restraining order not to contact Miss Rayner or talk about her on social media. Sport for you now, and US Open champion Emma Raducanu has backed up her maiden WTA Tour win with a straight sets victory over Anna Bogdan to reach the quarterfinals at the Transylvania Open. The British number one, who battled past Polonia Hercog in 3 sets in her opening match, has now beaten Bogdan 6-3, 6-4. Raducanu is now set to face 19-year-old Ukrainian Marta Kostyuk in the final 8 of the tournament, and we wish her luck. Those are the latest news headlines. I'm back in half an hour.
Welcome back. You're with the Afternoon Agenda, and let's talk COP26. You know, it all started so well. Brexit Britain strutting about on the world stage, turning Cornwall into a COVID petri dish as the G7 congregated on the beaches of St Ives, with now another major global summit to take place in wee Scotland this weekend, where, well, in my opinion, the good, the bad and the downright dodgy will bump fists and lock horns in Glasgow in a race to the bottom to go green. But despite an extensive guest list, there are already some significant no-shows and serious backpedalling so fast that certain world leaders could win the Tour de France in reverse. Now, the Queen, our greatest global ambassador, is swapping glad-handing for a prereq. Perhaps the only humans on the planet influential enough to even make world leaders bumble and genuflect in subjugation. There's the rather awkward recent budget, stripping passenger duties on domestic flights just before Boris also reminds us that recycling is, well, literally rubbish, and a legion of crusties will head across Hadrian's Wall to make Britain look like Greenpeace trying to organise the Fire Festival. The dulcet tones of David Attenborough will be piped out of net zero speakers. Prince Charles will encourage us all to dig for victory, and the newspapers will be full of what was on the menu at which hobnobbing event before they all assemble like a team of ageing Avengers for the group photo in the Glasgow drizzle, grinning proudly at the agreements to save the world, which will contain more concessions and caveats than a Beverly Hills prenup. I can't wait. Well, let's restart the conversation. My first guest this hour is chairman of E3G and former government advisor on climate change, Tom Burke. Tom, lovely to be talking to you again. Do you think that COP26 is going to be able to really achieve the stringent agreements that we need to be having in place at this point?
I think COP26 needs you to keep everybody in order and keep them consistent with what they say. I think it's actually important that it's taking place, and it will make a difference. It will not do what we need to do to make the planet safe for ourselves and our children.
So, I mean, the problem we have here is there are some pretty striking absentees, such as China, who are, you know, some of the world's biggest global polluters. In fact, we seem to export a lot of our own carbon footprints to the Far East. If they're not prepared to sit around the table, even though they have said they will put a strategy in place and are now ruminating on what that will be, then what's the use of the rest of the world sitting down to have a chinwag?
Well, we don't. I mean, if we never had conversations in which we couldn't start a conversation if everybody was there, we'd probably be a lot quieter, but we wouldn't necessarily be getting much done. I think there's a lot of more being made of the Chinese premier not being here than it warrants. He hasn't been out of his country since COVID started. He didn't even go to his own COP in China on biodiversity in person. I suspect we'll find he will turn up like other leaders will turn up on video making a contribution. And meanwhile, there'll be a very big Chinese delegation there, just like I suspect there'll be a big Russian and big other litigations. So you can exaggerate a little bit on the symbolics of it. What matters is what actually comes out at the end of the 2 weeks.
And how much, when it comes to shouldering the burden for saving the planet, how much needs to be determined by governments, how much needs to be shouldered by businesses, and how much comes down to the individual and how we manage our lifestyles?
There's no doubt at all. The thing that really matters is that governments put in place the right policies so that private capital can actually drive forward the energy transition that needs to take place. And they've got to be policies that are sympathetic to what a business can do. They've got to be consistent. And you hear that time and again from the business community that what really troubles them are governments or politicians that chop and change their minds. So the bulk of it, particularly with power and transport, is going to be done with government. When we come to some of the more difficult areas where you've got lots of people having to make relatively small decisions, but which add up across millions of people into something significant, then it will fall to people to play a larger part. But everybody, I mean, what you see all over this country and indeed other countries is people who've really got the message that the climate is in trouble are doing things themselves already to try and make it better, not just in terms of their personal lifestyles, but also engaging with others in their community, doing things together with people. And that's the key message out of all of this. Nobody is going to solve this problem on their own. We've got to really work together. And that's really what the COP is symbolizing.
In terms of if you could come up with a wish list of targets, policies, agreements out of COP26, what would be the top few of that wish list?
The top of the wish list would be that, first of all, we keep our promises. We promise the emerging economies, the countries that are being most hit by a changing climate, we promise them $100 billion a year back in Paris, and we haven't delivered on that promise. So the first thing on my wish list is that we do that. We deliver on that $100 billion a year, dollars a year promise. The second thing on my wish list is that we increase the rate at which we're taking carbon out of the atmosphere. And the cheapest, best, and most effective way to do that is to invest in energy efficiency, which was sadly lacking, I have to say, in the recent budget from the Chancellor. But that is the way that not only do you do something good for the climate, you also do something to get people's bills down. And we're failing to do that. So that's not setting a very good example for the rest of the world. And then I think the third bit on my wish list, most of all, is that we now accelerate the rate at which we review the progress we're making. What makes this problem really difficult and very, very unusual in the whole of human history is we've not only got to get to the right place, which we know we can do, at least technologically, we've also got to get there by a specific time, or in effect, the policy will have failed. So it's what we do in the next 10 years that makes it possible for us to have got to net zero by the middle of the century. That really matters. And we've got to do a lot of it faster, which means we've got to meet and agree to do things more quickly than we're currently doing.
Always wonderful speaking to you, Tom. Let's catch up again next week for an appraisal of what does come out of COP26, but always great having your advanced thoughts. That's Tom.
We'll only be halfway through next week.
Yeah, well, we'll get you back on. Don't you worry, Tom. Keep your phone on. Tom Burke, Chairman of E3G and former Government Advisor on Climate Change. Let's now speak to Benny Pizer, the Director of Net Zero Watch, a campaign group set up to highlight and discuss the serious implications of expensive and poorly considered climate change policies. Benny, the flip side to this huge change that we're going to have to adopt in our lives, businesses, governments, individuals, in order to meet these net zero targets, the problem is they cost a lot of money, don't they?
Yeah, indeed. And that's where the problem lies. If it were easy and cheap, as ministers claim and the renewables industry claims, we wouldn't have a problem. The problem is that the fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, remain much cheaper than the alternatives. And that's why so many countries are reluctant to give up on them. And where they try to do that, and the energy prices go through the roof, they face public opposition. So there is basically the reason why we have the 26th COP is that we've been doing this annual ritual for the last 26 years, and it's always the same. The kind of promises, pledges, the agreements are always the same, but CO2 emissions continue to rise. There's no slowing of CO2 emissions, and there won't be in the near future either. So there is a real conflict between what the climate scientists say has to be done and what you can actually politically do. And that's the problem. And I don't see any solution to that problem in the near future.
Do you think it would be fair of me to suggest that government policy over the past couple of decades, especially towards sustainable energy, has rather filled the pockets of some very rich people with a lot of money and meanwhile added huge chunks of cash onto gas bills, affecting those who can least afford to pay them?
Yeah, well, that is part of the problem. If we had, let's say 20 years ago, instead of, putting 10 billions or so into renewables, which are unreliable and expensive, and we know they don't work when there is no sun or there is no wind, if we had really moved into just nuclear energy and natural gas, we would have been further down the decarbonization route. We would have actually managed to convince other countries to do the same. But because we put all the eggs almost into the renewables, we are now facing these high energy costs and the problem of not having enough energy when the wind stops blowing. So people are looking at us and say, do we really want to go down the same route as Britain, where we have an increasingly unstable national electricity grid and high energy costs? That's not an example the rest of the world want to follow.
But what is the solution? I mean, once upon a time, we had plans for 6 new nuclear plants, and that all seems to have gone rather awry. And these things take a long time to build and a lot of money, but most significantly, the amount of time to get them online. So what can we do? If our plan is to get rid of gas boilers by 2030 and be carbon neutral by 2050, what can we do in that time frame?
Yes. Well, for a start, I very much doubt that any government in this country would actually manage to ban gas boilers. There will be a revolution before that is going to happen. No one is want to be poorer and colder. So this whole idea of banning gas boilers is not going to happen. But what you can do is 2 things. Get rid of the subsidies for renewables. Support nuclear energy. The nuclear is the future in any case, whether it's small modular reactors, whether it's normal reactors, or whether it's future. And in the interim, build natural gas-fired power plants with low carbon emissions in the transition to that period. That's the only viable, economically alternative that would take the public with you. All the other options that the government is now proposing will crash on contact with reality and with contact with voters. Voters will not accept any policies where energy prices continue to rise year on year.
I couldn't agree more. Benny, fantastic having you on again, and let's catch up again and do a little bit of appraisal of what's going to happen this weekend. Well, there'll also be plenty of talk about alternative fuels, and Dr. Michaela Kendall is a hydrogen fuel expert and CEO of Adelan, a green energy supplier. Michaela, we don't hear much about hydrogen. We're hearing a lot more about nuclear at the moment. I think the government's realising they've got a lot of catching up to do in that department. But tell me the benefits of hydrogen.
So hydrogen is a clean fuel at the point of use. There's no carbon in it, so you can emit it without carbon. If it's generated by renewable energy, then it's green. So there's no carbon associated with the production as well. So it's it doesn't solve everything. It just solves specific use cases, and you can see some of them: hydrogen buses, hydrogen HGVs. And actually blending hydrogen into the gas pipeline, the distribution network, will be an immediate carbon win.
To get enough supplies of hydrogen, how costly is it and how safe is it?
So it's perfectly safe when it's engineered properly. So there's nothing unsafe about hydrogen. You just have to engineer it like any flammable gas. That's it. But you have to do it in a specific way for hydrogen and the properties. But there's no inherent safety issues. And yes, you can produce it in vast quantities. And the world is planning to do exactly that. There is $500 billion planned investments into the hydrogen economy globally at the moment, $76 billion of which is coming from governments, precisely because they believe that they will be able to distribute hydrogen widely and generate it. The great thing is that it's an energy security issue because you can generate it in every country. You don't have to take it from specific countries and ship it around the world.
And are there countries already using a lot of hydrogen-powered energy?
Yes, so America is generating a lot of hydrogen, and many other countries are. So we also produce a lot of hydrogen currently, but it's more in the petrochemical industry. So we do produce it. We didn't really use it before we vented it to atmosphere, but now we see the use for it. And it's really about the market price, right? So it's about a market failure here, that we've never really priced carbon properly, and therefore we didn't value things that actually could be a fuel, but they weren't considered useful. So we have to. I think the main issue here about hydrogen is it's a market failure. We have to address that.
And if hydrogen could be a huge contributing factor to reaching net zero targets, why are we not really talking about it that much?
Well, around the world, everybody is. I think the UK is particularly slow, right? So, and there's lots of different reasons for that. I think we are distracted by nuclear largely, whether we should go ahead with that or not. And that is a very, very long conversation. And we do invest an enormous amount into nuclear today. It's difficult to get the precise number, but it's billions every year goes into nuclear in the UK. We do not invest that much into hydrogen right now. So I think if hydrogen is an option, then we really need to up the investment. And indeed, Prime Minister's mentioned it in the 10-point plan. It's also, he's mentioned it at the recent investment summit and many times over the last few months. So I think that the whole government is looking for hydrogen as a transport fuel, primarily to solve the carbon problem associated with transport, but it's also looking to distribute it, as I said, in the gas grid to decarbonise quickly. And it is, it's quite possible, but you have to have the investments. And I think Tom made a very good point about investments and COP26. That's what COP26 is really about. It's about the scorecard, about how people are performing according to their commitments in terms of the Kyoto protocols. And then it's about how much investment are they willing to put into developing clean energy.
Michaela, it's been really fascinating talking to you, and I get a feeling we're going to be talking about hydrogen a lot more, and therefore talking to you quite a lot more. It's been wonderful to have you on the show today to discuss this, something we haven't really discussed much in this country. Now, the Duchess of Cornwall delivered a deeply impassioned speech on violence against women last night. We're going to be discussing that after this short break.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GBNews.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GBNews.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News, 4 to the point.
Welcome back. The Duchess of Cornwall has called for action to prevent violence against women. Speaking at Shameless Festival in London, the Duchess paid tribute to those women who've lost their lives to violence. Here's what she had to say.
This country has been appalled and saddened by the loss of women to violence this year. On average, one woman is killed by a man every 3 days. Sarah Everard, Sabina Nessa, Wenjing Lin, Jatika Goyle and Benelin Burke are names which, with all the others, must never be forgotten. We need to get the men in our lives involved in this movement. We do not in any way hold all men responsible for sexual violence, but we do need them all aboard to tackle it. After all, rapists are not born, they're constructed.
Well, let's get reaction to her speech with domestic abuse leader, victim support, Valerie Wise. Valerie, did that hearten you somewhat to hear someone with the Duchess's profile actually, you know, talking in quite strident terms about the issue of violence against women?
Yes, I mean, I think it was excellent. And also what it means is there's a lot more publicity around the subject. We're having that discussion now precisely because the Duchess of Cornwall made that speech yesterday.
We seem to be having this discussion a lot at the moment. We've had 2 big high-profile crimes and more that, you know, really don't get the attention that they deserve. And yet it seems to me on a daily basis, however much we're talking about this, I haven't heard any policy coming out from government. I haven't heard any constructive ideas of how we start tackling this. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that it's all very well talking about it, but it's about time we need actions and not words?
I couldn't agree more. And I think the Duchess asked a very important question when she said, how many more women must be harassed, raped or murdered before we truly unite to forge a violence-free world? And I mean, the fact is we live in a misogynistic society. The culture is that it seems to be acceptable to treat women and girls in this horrendous way. So we have to challenge this at every opportunity. But I also agree with the Duchess that we actually need men on board. Men need to be talking about this issue. And on the 25th of November, we've got White Ribbon Day, which is actually the day when men are encouraged to wear a white ribbon and make a promise never to commit, excuse or remain silent about violence against women. And that day, 25th of November, is also the start of the 16 days of action to end violence against women. So I think, as I say, men have a vital role to play because not all men are committing these crimes. So let's get the decent men on board and supporting those of us who are campaigning on this issue.
But this is the problem a little bit, isn't it? Because you're right, not all men are committing these crimes. In fact, I think it'd be very fair to say it's very few men who are the bad guys. Yet, I would agree, I think that we do live in a society that's becoming increasingly misogynistic. The problem is every time we try and have this conversation, men feel that they're under attack. They feel that they are being smeared or slandered, and they say, well, I'm not like that. So how do we get them on board?
Well, I think that's why November the 25th is really important, because it's an opportunity for men in a very visual way, by wearing a white ribbon, to say enough is enough. I'm not part of this culture. I want things to change. You know, I might have a female partner. I might have a female daughter. I'll have a mother and so on. So I think men have got an absolutely critical role to play. But I also think, you know, the police have a role to play. The fact is the police, you know, there's been a lot of damage done to the police over the last few months with high profile cases. the fact is that there are many, many good police officers, but unfortunately, they're being given a bad name by, some of them, like the murderer of Sarah Everard. Like yesterday, it was reported that a Met police officer has been charged with rape. This gives the wrong impression and also means, not surprisingly, women are dubious about trusting the police. I would emphasise the victim support is here. You don't have to report to the police. We're completely independent from the police, and we've got a 24-hour helpline, which is 0808 16 89 and 111, or you can use our live chat services. We are here entirely independent, here to give you support.
Now, do you think that there is something underneath all of this, why we are seeing, or at least hearing about, attacks against women, rapes, so on and so forth? Has something changed societally that's creating an uptick in this, do you think?
I think particularly the murder of Sarah Everard, because I think everybody was so shocked. But the fact, as the Duchess herself said, there's on average one woman murdered every 3 days. We don't see all of those names getting the publicity that Sarah Everard did. And that obviously was a truly shocking murder. But we really, perhaps we should be hearing every day about somebody else has been murdered. But let's not forget, this is the tip of the iceberg. Murders that are obviously horrendous, and it's the last straw. But 1.6 million women in this country experienced domestic abuse last year. Over 500,000 women in this country last year experienced sexual assault. But the conviction rate for rape is absolutely tiny. So we have to actually start seeing offenders brought to justice so that a proper message is sent out to those men that do abuse, do commit these horrendous crimes, that it will not be tolerated, and, appropriate sentences will be handed out and people will end up in prison.
Valerie, thank you so much for coming on yet again. And don't you worry, I'm going to keep banging on about this, because I really do believe we need to get to a point where women do feel safe walking home at night, in their homes, in their offices, in toilets, in restaurants, in nightclubs. The list goes on. So sorry to those viewers who find it all a bit boring, but it's a necessary conversation. Valerie Wise, thank you. Domestic abuse lead at Victims Support. Still to come on the afternoon agenda, it's time to hear what you think about COP26. Will the climate summit actually achieve anything? It's time for your say. But first, here's the news headlines.
Here are your GB News headlines this hour. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has confirmed that the last 7 remaining countries on the UK's red list will be removed from next Monday. So that means Peru, the Dominican Republic, Colombia, Haiti, Panama and Venezuela will no longer face the toughest travel restrictions. Previously, those arriving into the UK from red list destinations had to spend 10 days in a quarantine hotel upon arrival. The mother of 2 sisters who were murdered by a teenager has vowed to stop him ever being released from prison. Daniel Hussein, 19, fatally stabbed Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman last year after he made what he believed was a pact with the devil. He's been sentenced to life in prison and will serve a minimum term of 35 years behind bars. A 36-year-old man who sent malicious emails to the Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner has been spared jail. Benjamin Iliffe was arrested on Wednesday after sending the email from his personal account on the 16th of October. Iliffe was sentenced to 15 weeks in prison, suspended for 18 months. He was also handed a 2-year restraining order not to contact Miss Rayner or even talk about her on social media. And the businessman who organised the flat that crashed and killed the footballer Emiliano Sala has been found guilty of endangering the safety of an aircraft. David Henderson, seen here on the left, was convicted by a jury at Cardiff Crown Court earlier on today. The single-engine plane carrying 28-year-old Salah crashed into the English Channel, killing the player and the plane's pilot in January 2019. I'll bring you a full news update at the top of the hour. Now back to Alex.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
Welcome back. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has announced plans to overhaul alcohol duty and cut tax on some drinks. During his budget announced yesterday, he spoke about the move, which could see taxes on draft beer and Prosecco slashed, with changes that would reward lower strength drinks. Let's speak to Christopher Walkie, the founder of Glass of Bubbly, a promotion network for sparkling wine. Christopher, must have been music to your ears. Did you pop a bottle yesterday in celebration?
Yesterday, today and tomorrow, yes.
So what sort of an impact will this have on the industry in terms of making sure that bubblies become easier to buy, cheaper and more accessible to people? Will that have a really great impact on the UK industry?
Well, with regards to the UK industry, it really depends on who wants to claim that difference, that kind of a duty fee. So if the winery can literally keep that money, they can reinvest in the winery, which is good, or they can pass that saving on to the resellers, so the restaurants. So more people are buying English bubbly. With regards to the excise duty for the likes of wines coming from abroad, Prosecco and Champagne, then there's a saving to be made there. So again, this helps the hospitality industry in this country, which in turn helps the wineries.
Now, as a bit of an expert on this subject myself, of course, I have found one thing quite remarkable. Since the craze for Prosecco seemed to erupt, which, in my opinion, was because it made a more affordable alternative to champagne, it seems to me the price of Prosecco's gone up and the price of champagne's coming down. Do you think is that a fair assessment?
I think there's always been, should we say, cheap champagne. You can get a cheap bottle at the supermarket, and there's always going to be cheap Prosecco. There are good quality Prosecco that goes up in price, and there's obviously good quality champagne. So if you're looking for the budget, then champagne and Prosecco aren't too far away. Let's say it's a £5 difference sometimes. But if you want to expand to the quality, then Prosecco, you can go up to 20, 30, £40 a bottle, and goodness knows with champagne even more.
And is it worth splashing the cash to get something good quality? Or frankly, if you're, just someone who enjoys a glass of bubbly, it's perfectly valid to just opt for something that doesn't break the bank?
Well, I think at the end of the day, a glass of bubbly, a bottle of bubbly is a fun thing. So it could be champagne, Prosecco, Lambrusco, or even English fizz. If you want to indulge in quality aromas and flavours and you've got the time to do so, so you're not at a wedding party and having a quick drink, then there's some fantastic quality out there to explore. Even this year, English Fizz was voted the best in the world. A little winery down in Sussex, Fox and Fox, won the title in front of champagnes and Proseccos and everything else. So even on our home shores, not only can we make a good cup of tea we can make some good wines as well.
I agree with that, actually. Growing up in Gloucestershire, we had a couple of vineyards there, which made some very good plonk indeed. But I've often found that English sparkling wines tend to be fairly expensive. Do you think that's right? And what's the reason behind that?
They're made in the same way as champagne is made. So it's the traditional method. So they go through the same process, the same costs. These kind of wines are of very good quality, so they should be shoulder to shoulder with champagne. And they've got a good reputation now. They're getting more and more medals, more recognition, and being exported globally. So these wines are well worth exploring, and they certainly are as good as champagne. English bubbly.
Probably it's well worth pointing out to anyone out there watching their waistline. They're also, by and large, lower in calories, aren't they, than a glass of wine?
They can be. It depends on the sugar level in the bottle. So we've got different styles of wine. Some have more sugar, some have reduced sugar. Just have a look on the bottle and you can decide if it's the right one for you. But like anything, you shouldn't indulge in too much of anything, including alcohol. So a glass an evening is fine, and it shouldn't ruin any lovely diet.
And how important do you think the Chancellor's announcement is? Where, I mean, it's almost as if he's adding a bigger syntax to the most alcoholic booze, but actually giving a bit of a free pass to the things that you can probably have a good couple of glasses and still make sense.
Yeah, but it's all to do with the alcohol level. What he's done is, with regards to the still wines and the bubbly wines were always taxed more, even if they had the same percentage as still wines. He's now brought that down, so be it a bubbly wine or a still wine, it's taxed at the same amount. So, and they're only going to be, 12% for English bubbly, 12.5 maybe for champagne. Still wines usually about 11. So, you still can have a glass an evening. It equates to the same as like a whiskey or something to that effect, or 2 pints of beer.
Christopher, always fascinating talking to you. Next time, I hope you come in person with a bottle of bubbly in your hands. That would be very welcome indeed. Christopher.
Thank you very much. Take care.
You too, founder of Glass of Bubbly. Now, before we hear what you've got to say about our big topic today, COP26, I just want to share this with you. There are calls for mandatory menopause training for GPs and all healthcare professionals. It comes as some women say for years they had no idea they were going through a type of menopause. One woman we spoke to thought she had dementia, while another went through an early menopause at 17, but wasn't correctly diagnosed until she was 21. Menopause is when a woman's periods stop and usually affects women around the age of 51. Our West Midlands reporter Balvinder Sidhu has this special report for GB News.
Anna was just 17 when she first experienced the symptoms of menopause.
I was getting hot flushes. I remember I was at sixth form and I was hanging out the window sweating. The fact I was going through the menopause never got picked up. So I went on the pill. And then when I was 21, I came off the pill. I don't know why, I came off it for a break. But my periods never returned, and they looked at my ovaries and they basically concluded that I had gone through an early menopause, and that was at the age of 21.
She says the diagnosis shattered her future dreams.
I was just devastated. I think I was shocked, and I just remember kind of locking myself away in my room on my own and trying to process it. And for a really long time, I just didn't talk to anyone about it. I think I was embarrassed and ashamed because I was 21, I was at university, I was just starting out, and then I got told this, and your immediate thought is, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to have children. I hadn't even thought about having children, I was 21.
Premature menopause affects around 1% of women.
It makes you feel like you don't have a purpose in life, because we're all brought up as women to think that we're going to be mums.
Almost half of the population will go through the menopause at some stage. The average age is 51 years old. Symptoms can start months or even years before your periods stop. This is known as perimenopause. Symptoms can include irregular periods, hot flushes, night sweats, trouble sleeping, loss of libido, brain fog and joint pain. Women may experience some or more of these symptoms. For 1 in 10, they can last up to 12 years. Research has shown that the impact can be severe, from women leaving their jobs to taking time off work, relationship breakdowns, and in some cases feeling extremely hopeless.
For me, menopause was not hot flushes. For me, menopause was the psychological symptoms. And essentially, over a period of months, not having the right help and support and not having the right information, my mental health was affected to such a point that I came very close to taking my own life.
Sam runs a menopause support group for women. She says she wants to help others after her own experience.
I'd got a good job, I travelled for the UK or occasionally overseas, and I was forgetting things. I was forgetting people's birthdays, I was getting work things, I was constantly having to write lists, cross them off, rewrite the list. And my mum suffers with vascular dementia. My grandma had dementia, and it suddenly dawned on me, is this dementia? When I looked at it and a couple of things popped up to talk about perimenopause and menopause with forgetfulness, I was quite relieved. I've been very lucky with my GPs that I've had, but I know some ladies that aren't getting the support. Some GPs will not talk to ladies if they are under 45 because it's not the menopause, I've heard one lady say. Other ladies say that their GPs won't even talk about HRT.
We need mandatory menopause education for all our GPs. In fact, I would say for all healthcare professionals. And the amount of women who are still being prescribed antidepressants when they're perimenopausal because those symptoms aren't recognised, we desperately need to change that. We need much better support in the workplace, because recent surveys have shown us just how many people consider leaving the workplace.
Anna says counselling helped her recover.
For me, it's coming to the realisation, the acceptance that this is me and this is who I am, and that's okay, and that we're not all on the same path, and that I can be happy and fulfilled in life without having the family that I thought I would ultimately have.
For Anna, life is not a race, but an opportunity to appreciate every moment. Balvinda Sidhu for GB News.
Now, today on the afternoon agenda, we've been talking about COP26 and asking, will the climate conference achieve anything? And we've been hearing from a range of guests. I started by speaking to Christopher Snowdon, the head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economics. He says net zero is too expensive.
It's going to be very expensive for this country and for any country that tries to achieve net zero. And that's going to be the great difficulty in getting any kind of meaningful resolution out of this. There's a prisoner's dilemma here, really, which is that with the exception of a few technologies which are cheaper, at least in the medium term, if not in the short term, net zero is an incredibly expensive job. And in fact, it's a technologically impossible job as we speak.
Well, next, it was the turn of the chair of the Climate Change Alliance, Dr. Judith Anderson. She says people will make the changes needed.
We have to look at the fact that the majority of people are actually very concerned about climate change, particularly young people. And what we're finding is that if people gather in community, if people get together in community and understand this, they are much more likely to make those practical changes. You're much more likely to have situations where people are prepared to car share if they're sharing their concerns about climate change and having those heard.
Conservative peer and member of the Environment and Climate Change Committee, Lord Peter Lilly, says countries across the world won't follow the UK's lead.
The idea that the rest of the world is going to decide whether or not to decarbonise on the basis of minor aspects of one budget in Britain, which is the country which has made the strongest legal commitment to decarbonising, I just think shows that a lot of people in this country, in the climate activist world, are more interested in self-flagellation than they are in rational policy.
Tom Burke is the chairman of E3G and a former government advisor on climate change. He says the right policies need to be in place to make a difference.
COP26 needs you to keep everybody in order and keep them consistent with what they say. I think it's actually important that it's taking place, and it will make a difference. It will not do what we need to do to make the planet safe for ourselves and our children. There's no doubt at all. The thing that really matters is that governments put in place the right policies so that private capital can actually drive forward the energy transition that needs to take place. And they've got to be policies that are sympathetic to what business can do. They've got to be consistent, and you hear that time and again from the business community, that what really troubles them are governments or politicians that chop and change their mind.
And finally, the director of Net Zero Watch, Benny Pizer, told me that fossil fuels still remain cheaper options.
That's where the problem lies. If it were easy and cheap, as ministers claim and the renewables industry claims, we wouldn't have a problem. The problem is that the fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, remain much cheaper than the alternatives. And that's why so many countries are reluctant to give up on them. And where they try to do that and the energy prices go through the roof, they face public opposition.
Well, now that we've heard what our guests had to say, it's time, of course, now for you, the viewer, to have the final word on COP26. We've been asking, will the climate conference achieve anything? Stephen says all it's for is to work out what surcharges and taxes they can put on us. It's all about the money. They know mankind cannot control the weather. David says, I can't see how it can be successful when the biggest polluters will, if anything, continue to increase emissions going forward. Peter says, at the end, it will achieve a lot of happy delegates, eating and drinking for free and having a jolly good time before they climb back into their private jets. Chris says it shouldn't even be taking place. If things are meant to be that serious, why are we inviting people from all over the world? Steve says, no, it won't do anything. These things never do anything beyond the paper exercise it inevitably becomes. None of those that should be there are attending, and they've all flown in from all four corners of the world to combat climate change. Rick says, this government isn't bothered about the climate crisis. It wouldn't have just lowered taxes on internal flights in the UK if that was the case. You try and reduce the internal flights in the UK. James says the main protagonists aren't even attending. Unless the biggest abusers agree to do something, everyone else is wasting their time. Eileen says, this is a waste of money from the beginning, not to mention the risk of spreading COVID. Well, the result of our poll, we have been asking on Twitter, will the climate conference achieve anything? 96% of you say no. A good 4% if you're a little bit more optimistic and say yes. I want to consider myself in that 4%. You know, if we really are facing a climate crisis, then it's better to try and do something than to do nothing at all. And at least all the world's attention is going to be on it in our very own Glasgow. We'll be reporting on what happens there next week. But for this week, from me, it's goodbye. You've been watching The Afternoon Agenda. Have a wonderful evening.
Hi there and welcome to the latest forecast. There is further rain for many during the next 24 hours, particularly those areas of northern and western England, southern Scotland as well as Wales, where we are currently seeing heavy rainfall. And this weather front has stalled during the last couple of days across northern England, southern Scotland. It's finally making some progress south and east, but the focus for heavy rain continues to be Cumbria. Amber warning enforced for the rest of the day, and then increasingly Wales and the southwest. Spells of rain overnight amounting to 40 millimetres widely, 80 millimetres over higher ground, perhaps even more for Snowdonia. Risk of disruption, risk of localised flooding. Drier for East Anglia in the southeast, mild here. Colder for Northern Ireland, Western Scotland as well, with some clear spells overnight. Otherwise, a lot of cloud as we start off the day on Friday. Further spells of wet weather pushing through Wales, moving up into northern England, southern and then eventually central Scotland. The rain across England and Wales turning to showers by the afternoon as they finally arrive into the east of England, staying mild in many places. But brighter skies start to emerge in Northern Ireland, South Wales and South West England, albeit with a few showers, and colder air is pushing in here. We say goodbye to the rain, finally, from northeast Scotland overnight, but the next batch of showers or rain moves through by the early hours, pushing into Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest during Friday evening, and then into parts of Scotland, central England, by dawn on Saturday. With all of that weather going on, it's going to be a mild start to the weekend, but not as mild as it has been. And it's a bright enough start in East Anglia and the southeast, but the rain is moving through here quite quickly, and it also clears through parts of Scotland by the afternoon. It's replaced by sunny spells and blustery showers across all parts on Saturday. Sunday sees more widespread wind and rain, and it turns colder.
Join me, Nana Aquia, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone I We learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m.